Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Product Coach Podcast, or welcome to the Product Coach Podcast. So today's a really special episode. We've got Teresa Torres joining us, and for those of you who don't know, Teresa's just released a brand new book. And I've also got a really good friend of mine, Alex, joining me. And Alex has been a fan of Teresa for quite a while. And Teresa has really helped Alex in her career. So when we were talking about getting today's podcast, Alex and I were chatting, and Alex also created a few questions to ask. So I thought, instead of me taking the spotlight of somebody else's hard work, I figured, hey, let's get Alex on and get Alex to help us out today as well. So Teresa, if you don't mind, I'd love it if you wouldn't mind give us a couple of minutes just on background for people probably like 3 people out there in product that might not have heard of you. Tell us how you got to writing your book and how it's going.
Yeah, perfect. So I work as a product discovery coach. If you're not familiar with that term, discovery just represents the work that we do to decide what to build. And I teach a very customer-centric approach to that. So how do we include our customers in the process of deciding what to build? I've been doing that for the better part of the last 10 years. And throughout that time, I've also been blogging at Product Talk. And I found that writing really helps me sort of just sharpen my thinking and figure out sort of patterns and trends that I'm seeing across the teams that I work with. And I got to the point where I started to recognize that there was something here that I thought more people needed access to. And so over the course of 2020, I wrote a book. And my book came out in May of 2021, and it's called Continuous Discovery Habits.
Cool. Congratulations. And how's that gone for you? What's the reception been like?
Oh, it's been incredible. I am completely blown away by, one, the book sales, and I've already exceeded my annual goals in the first 2 months. And
Awesome.
then just every day I see people posting about it on social media and talking about it, and it's been pretty spectacular to see the response.
Hey, way to go. I mean, look, you've been such a supporter of the community for so many years. So it's so great to see you get that, like, what in my opinion is like, and I'm sure Alex will second this, really deserved, it's super deserved. Well done.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
awesome. So Alex, do you want to crack on with our first question for Teresa today?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Ross. So Teresa, one of my favorite frameworks actually that I've learned from you is the opportunity solution tree. I was wondering if you've got any advice for product managers trying to implement that first time with their teams and their senior stakeholders, because I know sometimes there is pushback a lot from trying new things and new frameworks. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so first I'll just sort of describe what the opportunity solution tree is designed for, and then we can get into kind of how do we get started with it. So really the goal of this visual is to help you find the best path to an outcome. So already that's hard for people, right? We're really steeped in an output world. And so I think step 1 is really being intentional about your outcome, recognizing it's going to take some iteration to really learn how to define a good outcome. One of the things I walk teams through is our first inclination is usually to define an outcome that's measuring an output. So we tend to count things that we're building. So then we can get past that by saying, well, what's the impact of building those things? Or we could even have a first pass could be, instead of counting the things that we're building, let's count the usage of those things. And then we can go a step further and say, let's actually count the value of using those things. So that's a couple questions you can ask to kind of get to a better outcome. And then once that is in place, I do see some teams think about the opportunity solution tree as just like a one-time exercise. Like, let's get everybody in the room and try to create this visual. And that's not really how it was intended. So the idea of the opportunity space on that, so the opportunities represent customer needs, customer pain points, and customer desires. And it really is, if you've heard the terms like problem space, solution space, it's the same idea. Opportunities is just a little bit more inclusive than problems. We do more than solve problems as product teams. And really those opportunities should come from customer stories, so from our interviews. And that's the big hurdle I see for teams is they're just working with really shallow data. They're trying to identify opportunities from like support tickets, and there's no context. We don't really know why customers are asking for what they're asking for. They tend to ask for features, and we're not getting at what's the root need. So I think really to use the opportunity solution tree well, it starts with interviewing on a regular basis and learning how to interview in a way that allows you to quickly identify opportunities. And what's hard about this is interviewing is a skill, identifying opportunities is a skill, framing opportunities is a skill, and then structuring them in this tree structure is a skill. So being able to use an opportunity solution tree well is a really complex skill that stacks a whole bunch of individual skills. But I think the reward of really like being able to make a good strategic decision about how to reach your outcome is worth investing in all those individual skills.
And where do you think people get stuck mainly when they try to do that, Teresa?
Honestly, even just at the very beginning of hearing opportunities, most teams, when they're interviewing, they're still interviewing about facts. So the example I give for this, if we were to look at Netflix, because everybody's familiar with Netflix, if I were going to interview you, Ross, about your Netflix behavior, my instinct is to ask you things like, what do you like to watch?
Sure.
That type of question isn't going to help me uncover needs, pain points, and desires. It's going to help me uncover facts. And I'm going to put facts in quotes because it may not even be an answer that reflects your behavior in reality. And so the first step to good opportunity mapping is really just learning how to interview for context. So instead of saying, what do you like to watch? Where do you watch? All those who, what, why, how questions. I want to ask you to tell me a story. Tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. And then my job is to really uncover that context, uncover all the nuances. And I'll get answers to those factual questions I can listen for. What did you watch? How did you decide? But I'm getting it in a context. And what's going to happen is opportunities will start to come out of that story. So the first thing is, what's your inputs? Are you collecting stories? And then the second piece is, even if I collect a really rich story, you still have to tune your ear for what's a need and what's a pain point and what's a desire. And that takes a little bit of practice as well.
So it's really getting to it, not just taking the surface, really.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And I think that goes for so much that we do as product managers, right? There's a lot of surface stuff that we can take, and if we don't have the confidence to really not take, like, just because people say it, not necessarily believe it, right? You know, if you were asking me what I was watching on Netflix, so much of that would be my daughter's playlist, and we'd be watching so many things around puppies that we've just got. It wouldn't be a very different question. What do I like to watch, right?
Yep.
Or why do I use it? You know, what is my use for it and stuff?
Yeah, and actually, like this example is a really compelling one, because what are we trying to learn? Do I care more about your personal preferences and what you like to watch, or do I care about the bigger context of your family and what's happening in your life right now? And if I just ask you, hey, Ross, what do you like to watch? I might get one short answer. Whereas if I ask you, tell me about the last time you watched, I'm actually going to get this context of you have a new puppy and you have a daughter and you're doing something together. And it's that context that starts to uncover things like pain points and needs and desires.
That's absolutely brilliant. That's cool. Alex, have you got any other thoughts around that?
No, I think it's really interesting because, and I think this kind of ties in with some of the other questions I have around continuous interviewing, which I think it's a brilliant concept. And you describe it so well in your book, which I've just finished reading, by the way, and it's truly amazing because I think it teaches me how to interview properly. But I think there are so many product managers who still believe that their job is not really to interview customers that much because they're part of multidisciplinary teams with user researchers, and therefore, you know, I can count on that user researcher to go away and ask the questions and give me the data. And I, for one, in my career, I like to talk to my users all the time. So how do I balance, I guess, working with the user researchers? Because I do get the pushback in saying, well, you're not trained to ask questions. You know, that's the job of a user researcher. You can't really uncover proper data. So how do we overcome that difference in responsibilities in your view?
Yeah, let me ask you a question. So here in the US, we have this kids game that people play at parties. It's called the game of telephone. Do you guys know this game?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Is it like broken telephone or?
Maybe. I'll explain it. It's really simple.
Okay.
Let's say you have 8 kids at a party and you give one kid a message and they have to whisper it to the next kid, whisper it to the next kid. And then the 8th kid says what they heard. And it's always a funny laugh because what the 8th kid said never sounds anything like what the first kid said, right? What's happening? Every hop we're losing a little bit is lost each step of the way. We see the same thing with knowledge about our customer. right? Whether it's business stakeholders are talking to customers, communicating to the product manager, communicating to the designer, communicating to the engineers, we're losing fidelity of that message. We're losing context, we're losing nuance. So that's one reason why we want the team that's building the product to have firsthand exposure to the customer. We're trying to reduce handoffs because we know handoffs leads to waste, and we know we lose some of the message. Now there's the second piece of like, well, we're not experts in research. Okay, I hate to say this because I'm going to make a lot of enemies here. The vast majority of user researchers are also not experts in how to interview customers. And the reason why is because they learned research in industry. There's a small number of them that have academic backgrounds and truly learned how to qualitatively interview, but the vast majority learned how to do research in the context of industry, and so can product managers and designers and software engineers. And that's not a dig on user researchers, right? They have a skill, their skill matters, but it's like when we say, design is magical, only designers can design. That's not true. All humans are problem solvers. All humans are designers. Now, if your profession is design, you are going to have design skills that the average person doesn't have. Just like if your profession is user research, you are going to have research skills that the average person doesn't have. That doesn't mean the average person can't talk to a customer and get value from that conversation. And especially because to increase the reliability of your interviews is not that hard. It really is as simple as spend your time collecting specific stories about the past. And when user researchers hear that, it feels threatening because it feels like we're really trivializing what they do. And that's not true. They will always have deeper, richer research skills than the average product person on a product trio. But that doesn't mean we can't have both. And what I would argue to a user researcher who is pushing back on this, look, companies need tons of research. This is not should you do it or should I do it? It's a both and. Like, this is the epitome of a both and. You should do research and I should do research, and we should share what we're learning with each other.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear you say this.
So can you think of some examples? You came up with a great example with Netflix. Like, have you had like lots of pushback from user researchers in your experience, or have you had to kind of play referee, for want of a better word, right? How's that worked out? What kind of tools have you used to get that to work out?
Honestly, I think it's less about the individuals and more about the organizational context, right? So usually when we get pushback from a user researcher, it's because they feel threatened in their job. Everybody experiences this. This is not unique to user researchers, right? Something changes, and the first thing we ask is this a threat to me? And on the surface, it does sound like it's a threat to user researchers. If all my product teams are able to interview customers, what's my role in the organization? And I think there is plenty of space for user researchers. In fact, if I was ever hiring a product team, I would put a user researcher on every single one of them, because they do bring skills and they are good subject matter experts that can be advising that team on how to make their research better. And they can do here's the thing. A product team is working on a week over week cadence. We need fast answers to daily questions. That's what a product team does. We're trying to make a decision right now. We need some data that supports that decision or refutes that decision. That's very different from traditional user research. Traditional user research, we're looking at longer horizon questions. We're asking those big strategic questions that our company needs answers to that we're not going to get on a week over week cadence. And that's why this really is a both and situation. So if I have a team of user researchers and I'm moving to this empowered product trio model where they're all doing their own discovery, what's the role of that centralized user research team? I see three purposes. One, they can work on longer horizon research, get answers to those big strategic questions that you're not going to get an answer to in a week. And they have the research skills to do more longitudinal studies, whereas the average product person is not going to develop those skills. So that's the first thing. The second thing they can do is we can embed them in our product teams, and they can help product teams with that fast week over week research, right? We can use them as product trio members, in which case you'd probably have a product quad. The third thing we can do is if we don't have enough researchers to embed them in all of our trios, we can assign them to a couple of trios and use them as subject matter experts, where they advise their trios on the research that they're conducting while they also do longer horizon research. So there is plenty of room for user researchers in this model.
That's
Yeah.
really interesting. I really like what you said about the whole culture thing, because I think that's where so many things just get broken, where it's kind of you've got the best intentions, but the company's culture doesn't allow you to do that. And it's kind of heartbreaking sometimes, but you kind of got to, if it doesn't work, or if you can't get to what you kind of said, or if there's just no interest in higher up to do it, sometimes you just got to leave and find the organization that wants to do that and actually wants to keep learning, right?
Yes, and short of that, I think there's lots of things you can individually do without tackling the whole organizational culture piece. So
Sure.
if I'm an individual product manager and there's this sort of antagonistic relationship with my user research team, I can choose to leave. But before I did that, I would first say, is there a single user researcher I can start building a better relationship with? Can I invite them to give me feedback on my week over week discovery? Can I go sit in on their longer horizon research conversations and learn about more of the strategic context in which my product lives? So here's one of the things that's really important to me that I talk about in the book. As individual contributors, it's really easy to blame our leaders or blame our organizational context. And I'm not going to trivialize that, because a lot of us work in very tough organizational contexts where we're trying to work almost the opposite of what business culture encourages. But we also have way more agency than we realize. As an individual, we can build those individual relationships and start chipping away at that organizational culture. Because what is organizational culture? It's simply the way we do things here. And you can start changing the way you do things here and start chipping away at creating better examples of what your organizational culture might look like.
Actually, Alex, I think, is, when I think of someone, she's a great example of someone who does that. I mean, she does reach out, and she's got so much passion in sharing what she does and such a love of that she does share that. And I must say, within her team or even the other teams, I've seen them just really starting to warm up to that. And kind of, she's I wouldn't say dragging them along, because that kind of assumes that they're kind of not coming willingly. But it's she's a great example of someone who does that really, really well. Alex, do you have any other thoughts as well?
Yeah, I guess because I'm really I guess excited with your about your response, Teresa, because I always see our job as product managers, because it's quite easy to think I'm gonna pack up and go to this like amazing Silicon Tech Valley type of company where everything is going to be a magical land, which in all honesty probably it won't be. So I've always seen our role as trying to be agents of change a bit as well. Surely we can't really tackle the big organizational problems when we see them, but we can definitely chip away at change. And I think that definitely starts with fostering better relationships with the teams.
Yeah, and I think the thing to understand is that like our brain always thinks the grass is greener somewhere else, right? And the reality is, even if they're really big name companies that we all admire, practices are unevenly distributed. Like there's a William Gibson quote that I think is really relevant to product, which is the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And that's true at every single company, right? So even if we take the biggest name, most successful tech companies, you're going to have some teams that work really well, and you're going to have some teams that are just as dysfunctional as any other company. And so people always ask me, how do I find a company that works this way? And I think that's the wrong question. How do I find a team and a leader that work this way? Because you're never going to find a company, at least not yet, maybe hopefully in our lifetime, but we're just not there. Our practices are evolving too quickly for there to be whole companies. Unless we're talking about teeny tiny startups, then maybe there's a whole company. But really, I think the more important question is, how do I find trio mates and a boss who's willing to let us work this way?
Yeah.
I think that's so important. I mean, there's so many people that I coach in my product coaching practice where they're absolutely brilliant people, but they're just absolutely held down by a boss who's either intimidated by them or has their own hang-ups or whatever they are. And, there's someone I think of, and she's absolutely brilliant, but her boss just won't let her blossom. And you're talking about someone who's so incredibly talented, but the boss will criticize her on, let's say, her PowerPoint skills. And it's like, okay, come on. Like, that's a great company, and there will be pockets of great product in that company. It's a household name everybody knows, but in her particular pocket, it's just kind of, being a little bit over dramatic, it's kind of soul destroying. But yeah, so I totally get what you're saying.
That's, I think, a key thing for especially people early in their career to have awareness of, is that like, yeah, you can have that big name on your resume, but if your boss isn't supporting your growth, you're probably better off somewhere, either somewhere else within that company where you're going to have a boss that is supporting your growth, or just going to a smaller name company, right? Like that brand recognition isn't really going to matter if your development is at risk. And if you're early in your career, the thing you should be optimizing for is your own development, is how do you learn as much as possible? And you can always go work for one of those big name companies later in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I get so many people reach out kind of, hey, could you get me a job at Facebook? Like literally. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Why? Why are you the right person for them? Maybe they're not the right company for you. I mean, I remember earlier in my career, I thought that was cool and I was like, X, whatever, but now it's like, who cares? Like, I mean, there's so many other things. It's who you're working with, what is the culture like, and kind of what impact are you making? There's so many other important things than just having that name in your CV, right?
And I don't want to underestimate the value of having that big name. There are plenty of hiring managers that use that as a shortcut. But here's what I'll share. What a lot of people don't talk about is if you end up at a big name company and you're not able to develop your skills, and actually a lot of those big name companies, they already have well-versed practices and you just kind of slot in and follow their procedures, which means you're going to learn less than if you went somewhere else where you get to help define those procedures and you have a boss that's more active in developing you. So here's the deal. Having that big name on your resume is a little bit like a shortcut. There will be hiring managers that really care. But I know a lot of people that early in their career worked at one of those big name companies, especially if it was later in that big name company's development, right? So after their sort of startup phase. And here's what's happened to them. People look at their resume and they go, wow, this person must be amazing. But they didn't get the development early in their career. And they feel like charlatans. They're like, I don't actually know how to do my job. I worked at a company where I followed a procedure. Nobody invested in my development. And because I worked at this big name company, people think I'm amazing. And I know that I'm just at the beginning. And then they feel stuck and they don't feel comfortable even later in their career saying, hey, I need help. I don't know how to do this. So I'm not suggesting you can't find a boss at a big name company that's going to invest in your development. That's like the sweet spot, right? You get the big name and you get the boss who cares. But I think early in your career, what's most important is finding a boss who cares about your development and is going to let you blossom.
Wow, that's like, I just want to kind of pause there and let that sink in with the listeners, because I think there's so many people that kind of, when we look at career development, that's one of the things that doesn't come up a lot. A lot of it is kind of, hey, have you got this? Have you got that? As opposed to, are you going to be working with someone who's really, really going to support you? I think that's big. I think that's, I just want to kind of let that sink in and kind of pause there for a few seconds. So
yeah, and let's connect this with interviewing, right? So like with customer interviewing, because let's say I'm interviewing for a job. Let's say I'm 22, I'm right out of college. I'm interviewing for a job and I want to know, how do I evaluate if my boss is going to care about my own development? I can ask the boss, like I'd be like, hey Ross, do you care about your employees' development? That's a terrible question. Nobody's going to say no to that question. 100% of people are going to say yes. So how do I vet, does Ross really care about my personal development? It's the exact same thing we ask in customer interviews. Hey Ross, tell me about a time when you invested in one of your employees' personal development. And then I'm listening for who initiated it, how involved was the boss, what did the employee get out of it? Did they initiate it? Did the boss initiate it? Did the employee have a say in what they were being developed around? Right? And in the best case scenario, after Ross tells me that story, I'd be like, great, can I talk to that employee? And I'm going to ask the employee the exact same question. Hey, your boss just told me about this story. Tell me your version.
Yeah, Ross who? What are you talking about? Like that, that didn't do that. I love that. It reminds me of someone I was coaching recently. And I always say to them, like, when you go into an interview, one of the things is kind of, say that, hey, I'm so excited to meet you. I'm excited about what you're doing. Genuinely, if they are. If they aren't, they shouldn't be there. But genuinely, I'm excited about what you're doing because you're doing blah, blah, blah. And I think that's great because of this reason. By the way, the recruiter never really gave me feedback on what you thought of my CV. What was it about the CV that you really liked, by the way? And there's a couple of things that come out of that. I remember the one where this guy's coaching went in there and the guy said, look, let's have questions. We'll hold questions till the end. I was like, that wasn't a question. There was a, do I have any rapport with this human? Because if the person's going to go, no, hold any questions till the end, wait till they're your manager and you want to go and do that. Because And when that job never worked through, I was like, dude, you dodged a bullet. Because if the person won't even let you go, hey, by the way, let's basically kind of say, hey, let's get some rapport. What have we got in common here? And the guy won't even entertain that, right?
Really what that hiring manager is doing is communicating from the first moment, my needs matter more than yours. I don't want to work for that person.
Sure. That was my feedback. I was like, dude, you totally dodged a bullet. Because you would have been in meetings with him, and if in an interview session where he should be, at least in theory, also mutually trying to impress you a little bit, or at least there's a mutual kind of respect, and he's not even willing to do that. And it's not like it's a massive agenda with 15 people in a meeting, and it's like, okay, questions will be 10 minutes scheduled for then. It's like, come on, you're just sitting down to meet the person. So I love that. I think there's just really interesting, those kind of telltale things. Or, hey, tell us, because most of the questions are kind of, okay, at the end of an interview, tell me about the job. It's more like, okay, well, how are you going to help me in my career?
Yeah.
And usually the person will be like, oh, you know what? No one's actually ever asked me that. Well, this is, okay, I love that, Teresa. Thanks. Alex, have you got any thoughts on that?
I was actually thinking back to continuous discovery, hearing you guys talk actually, and I was wondering whether I can ask a question about that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So that's a really powerful tool for product managers, which I hope personally that is used. Because I remember when we used to work in a normal world before the pandemic, when my continuous discovery involved actually spending physical time with the user. So I worked for a company building technology for the contact center. So I used to go and sit in the contact centers, and I used to drag my engineers with me as well, which I thought was quite powerful. But I think in the world we live now, where everything is like Zoom meetings and team meetings, and certainly the organization I work for is moving to a more remote working world, I guess. How can a product manager keep the team focused on that value of continuous discovery without, I guess, maybe without avoiding that fatigue from meetings? Because I certainly sometimes hear the feedback from engineers and saying, can you just send me a document with the requirements? And I was like, no, we're not going back to 1995 now. I need you guys on the call with me. So what's your advice on that, Teresa?
So there is research that shows that video calls are more tiring than regular in-person meetings. That is true, but I don't think that's the root cause of this problem. I think the root cause of this problem is that we have terrible meetings, right? Like the reason why we're getting Zoom fatigue to the degree that we do is because people are sitting in way too many meetings. Like I literally know product teams that are in meetings from 8 in the morning until 5 p.m. at night. That's insane. Like how are you doing any work whatsoever if you're in meetings the entire time? So that's the first thing. Then there's sort of how do we run an individual meeting, and we're frankly pretty terrible at it. So if like the vast majority of time that you're in a meeting, you're not actively participating, meaning like one person is talking to a bunch of people and maybe you weigh in a little bit here and there, that's exhausting, right? Because you're not an active participant in that meeting. Whereas if we look at the work that a product trio is doing, when we talk about a product trio collaborating, and in the book, one of my goals was to give teams activities they can do to help them learn how to collaborate together. So it's things like creating experience maps together, creating opportunity solution trees together, creating story maps together, creating interview snapshots together. These are all active activities. And if you're doing that in a Zoom meeting using something like a Miro or a Mural board or Jamboard or Lucid Chart, whatever your favorite tool is, like if you're collaborating actively in a meeting, that's not going to be the mental work might be exhausting, but the like Zoom meeting part of it, it's not going to feel the same is when you're just listening to somebody yabber at you. So, for a long time in the industry, we had this belief that product trios needed to be co-located. I actually didn't agree with that because I've been able to work from home since the very first job in my career. And, in the 90s, when I started working from home, we had terrible collaboration tools. We would email, we'd get on the phone. Like that was it. Those were our collaboration tools. And I still had amazing coworkers that collaborated well and we made it work. Today, we have so much better. We have video call, we have these digital whiteboards, we have Google Docs that we can all edit the same doc at the same time. Like our collaboration tools are amazing. I know teams that literally, they're the way they co-locate with their trio is they have a Zoom room that's open all day long. And while they're just sitting and doing their work, they're all on a Zoom so that they can simulate that moment of like, hey, I have a question. Can I ask you? And, people will pop out to join other meetings, just like in the office. You used to leave your desk to go to a meeting, right? And that's not exhausting because we're just simulating what it used to be like to be near each other. So I don't think it's the medium. It is true the medium exacerbates the exhaustion, but I think the root of the exhaustion is bad meetings, not face-to-face time over video.
This is really interesting, actually, because I never thought about it like that. But I could certainly think that we're definitely bad at meetings. And when me as a product manager need to be in certain meetings and I'm receiving meeting invites with like no agenda, no outcome, no understanding of, what the people want from me, but still the expectations for me to, spend an hour and a half in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of definitely see that now.
I think a really good skill for product people, everybody, product managers, designers, software engineers, researchers, anybody, probably anybody in business, is when you get a meeting invite to be like, what's my role in this meeting? Do I really need to be there? Do I need to physically show up, whether that's in a video call or in real life, to be part of this meeting? And I would respond to every meeting invite with, hey, can you just clarify what you need from me in this meeting? And most of the time it's going to be like, oh, we just want you to weigh in on this document. Great. Can I do that by email? Like the vast majority of time, we do not need to physically be together.
I think a lot of people don't have the confidence. And, I've been working remotely since long before the pandemic and loved it for years now. And I'm used to kind of blocking off most of my diary. So most of the time people go, look, I can only see like half an hour there on Thursday. As otherwise you kind of share a diary and people will just, in my mind anyway, steal your time. And I'll be like, hang on a second, my diary is open for you to view, but there's very few gaps. So it kind of forces them to ask, hey, I really need you for this or that. And it starts a discussion as opposed to in some of the places I've worked, it's like, oh, Ross is here. So, hey, he clearly has time. So let's just stick a meeting in and we can discuss what it's about. And I remember even this, go for it, Teresa.
Some of this comes back to organizational culture. Like I have worked with product people where it doesn't matter what's on their diary. Their boss is going to schedule over it. They're double booked. They're triple booked, right? And so I think confidence is one piece of it, like having the confidence to push back. But I think there's a more insidious part of this. When we get invited to a meeting, it's like a little dopamine hit. It says we're needed, right? And so there's a little bit of ego there. We don't want to say, hey, I don't want to come to your meeting because it feels good to get invited. It feels like we have a seat at the table. It feels like our opinion matters. But if we really want to do good work, just like you said, you carve out time on your calendar, you have to do that. You can't do good product work if you're in meetings all day, every day.
I don't know if you've read Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lemke.
I have not.
It's absolutely mind-blowing. She's an incredible neuroscientist. And the amazing thing that I took from that was, she'll say like for every dopamine hit, there'll be a crash. So it won't come back to homeostasis. It'll go below and then slowly go back up, right? So it's almost like for that dopamine hit that you're getting of, hey, I feel important for 5 seconds. Then it's like, shit, why did I commit to that? Like, it's almost kind of bringing you down. And then coming back to homeostasis is almost harder, right?
Yeah. Well, and this, like product managers in particular, although I think all product people, but I'm going to talk about product managers in particular. Like we get invited to the bug review meeting. We really think we need to be there. Do we? Like most bug review meetings, engineers talk infinitely about really minutia things that nobody cares about. What does the product manager really need to communicate in that meeting? These are the 3 critical bugs that are impacting customers. Send that in an email. Let the engineers go have their conversation. You don't need to be there, right? And I think that's hard. It's because it feels good to be there. We want to be the expert. We want our expertise drawn from. Find faster ways to communicate what you need to communicate and then get out of the way.
Yeah, I was communicating something similar this week where someone reached out to me and I was like, well, hang on a second. They were asking me for some advice and they were talking about, these people need to be there. And I was like, you don't need to be in that meeting. You need the other people to actually say, before they go to that meeting, set out their position, set out what, because in this specific context, set out their position, let the other person set out their position, do some pre-reads, and then get into the meeting. And I was like, maybe I'm just too old. I was saying, then it could be a celebrity death match, right? Or whatever. I mean, I was just being a little over dramatic, but I was trying to make a point of set it up, let them do the pre-reads, and then get them debated. And honestly, as a PM, all you're interested in is the outcome, because this was specifically around compliance. So it was like, okay, as a PM, you like a bug, you don't really have that much input. You've just got to you should understand what the output is and maybe really help that. But I think that's hard to do. I think there is confidence. It is kind of protecting your time. You know, I remember Alex and I were on a call where people were talking about burnout and products, and they were feeling burnt out. And so much of that is just taking on too much and just kind of not having the ability to say no. And if you really do feel that bullied in an organization that you can't say no, then yeah, maybe you do need to move, but maybe not. Maybe it's just you need to develop that skill, and then you realize you're not really being bullied. Someone's just waiting for you to push back and kind of go, okay, here's the context, and that's what it is.
I think protecting your time is one of the most important skills anybody in business can learn. And I do this to the extreme. So Ross, I know you worked with my admin, Karen, to set up this. I don't know if you had asked for to get on a call to talk about topics ahead of time, but here's what I'll share. My book came out on May 19th of 2021. It's currently September 24th of 2021. Since May 19th, I have done a promotional event for my book every single day, including some weekend days, right? So I'm doing literally a meetup, a podcast, a conference talk. It's crazy. I'm doing that because I want to get my book in as many people's hands as possible. So what happens when we schedule these events? Inevitably, the organizer says, hey, can we schedule 30 minutes to get on Teresa's calendar to talk about topics? No way. I'm doing an event every day. That would double the amount of time it takes for me to do all these promotional events. And what's going to happen in that 30-minute meeting? We're going to have a generic conversation about how we're going to talk about continuous discovery. Of course we're going to talk about continuous discovery. That's why you're bringing me on your podcast, right? So what I do is I just say, look, I'm happy to explore topics in a Google Doc offline or over email. And since May 19th, only once has somebody chose not to have me on their podcast or their meetup or whatever because I wasn't willing to give them an extra 30 minutes. All that is, it's me trying to protect my calendar so that I have thinking time and I can still do good work. And I even do this in my sales process. So one of the things that I sell right now is I sell a talk. I give a 45-minute talk on the what and why of continuous discovery. I'm doing a whole bunch of corporate speaking. It is the exact same talk. I do not customize it. And that's because I'm doing 1, 2, 3 a week. Like I don't have capacity right now to customize it. And that means it's going to work for some people and not work for other people. So what happens in the sales process? The prospect always says, hey, can we hop on a call to talk about the talk? Yeah. No, that's going to double, triple my work, right? So I'm very clear in my email. I just say, look, I would love to do this. My calendar right now is really crazy, which by the way, everybody resonates with. And I say, here's the talk. Here's how you can learn more about it. Here's a very detailed summary. If that works for you, I'd love to do that. Do this. If that doesn't work for you, let's talk next year when I have a little more capacity in my calendar.
That's brilliant. And Teresa, talking about calendars and timing, I want to be respectful of your time because we've got another couple of minutes scheduled. So that was the perfect segue for that. Thank you. Where, if people want to find out more about you, where would you like them, whether it's that talk or your book, where would you like people to go?
Yeah, so the easy place to get started is to go to producttalk.org. You can learn about the book there. The book is available around the world in most major bookstores, including the big one, Amazon. It's available in paperback and Kindle and EPUB. The Audible version is coming eventually. I do not have a timeline yet because I'm going to narrate it myself. I know people want it. I'm working on it. And then we do have some online courses that help you develop skills in each of the habits in the chapter. You can also find those on the Product Talk homepage. And then the other thing that we're doing that I'm really excited about is we know that most people don't just read a book and then magically put it into practice. Some of you do, and that's amazing. But if you want help putting it into practice, if you want to connect with like-minded peers, if you just want to be surrounded by people that are working this way to help you stay motivated and keep momentum, we did launch a community around the book as well through a membership program. And if you go to producttalk.org and scroll down to the bottom of the page and look for Find Your People, you can find more about that.
Awesome, Teresa, that was absolutely brilliant. I'll put all that information in the show notes when we release this, so people can check that out. And Teresa, thank you so much. And well, we are actually on time, which is great. So just having spoken about that. Alex, is there anything else you want to finish on, or anything else you want to say?
No, I just want to say to all the product managers out there to buy the book because it's great.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Well, Ross, thanks for having me. And Alex, I love all the great questions, and I'm so happy to hear my content's having an impact.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Teresa. You rock. Have an absolutely awesome weekend, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks, you too.
Cool. Cheers. Bye for now. Cool.